Hello, and welcome to the To Be Like Christ Bible Study podcast, where we explore and explain one chapter of the Bible at a time. My name is Luke, and I'm your host, and today's chapter is Genesis 33. Let's go ahead and read the text together. I'm going to be reading from the English Standard Version, and while I find it in my Bible, if you have a moment, hit the subscribe button on your podcast player so we can study it together again sometime. Genesis 33 is a bit of a shorter chapter with only 20 verses. Let's go ahead and read it. And Jacob lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, Esau was coming, and 400 men with him. So he divided the children among Leah and Rachel and the two female servants. And he put the servants with their children in front, then Leah with her children, and Rachel and Joseph last of all. He himself went on before them, bowing himself to the ground 7 times until he came near to his brother. But Esau ran to meet him and embraced him, and fell on his neck and kissed him, and they wept. And when Esau lifted up his eyes and saw the women and the children, he said, "Who are these with you?" Jacob said, "The children whom God has graciously given your servant." Then the servants drew near, they and their children, and bowed down. Leah likewise and her children drew near and bowed down. And last Joseph and Rachel drew near, and they bowed down. Esau said, "What do you mean by all this company that I met?" Jacob answered, "To find favor in the sight of my Lord." But Esau said, "I have enough, my brother. Keep what you have for yourself." Jacob said, "No, please, if I have found favor in your sight, then accept my present from my hand. For I have seen your face, which is like seeing the face of God, and you have accepted me. Please accept my blessing that is brought to you, because God has dealt graciously with me, and because I have enough." Thus he urged him, and he took it. Then Esau said, "Let us journey on our way, and I will go ahead of you." But Jacob said to him, "My Lord knows that the children are frail, and that the nursing flocks and herds are a care to me. If they are driven hard for one day, all the flocks will die. Let my Lord pass on ahead of his servant, and I will lead on slowly at the pace of the livestock that are ahead of me, and at the pace of the children, until I come to my Lord in Seir." So Esau said, "Let me leave with you some of the people who are with me." But he said, "What need is there? Let me find favor in the sight of the Lord." So Esau returned that day on his way to Seir. But Jacob journeyed to Succoth, and built himself a house and made booths for his livestock. Therefore the name of the place is called Succoth. And Jacob came safely to the city of Shechem, which is in the land of Canaan, on his way from Padan Aram, and he camped before the city. And from the sons of Hamor, Shechem's father, he bought for 100 pieces of money the piece of land on which he pitched his tent. There he erected an altar and called it El Elohe Israel. All right, so that is the text of Genesis chapter 33, and as we always do, let's remind ourselves of the context where we're picking up in the story, because we really are picking up in the middle of a story. Jacob decided after living with Laban, his uncle, for 20 years, that he was going to finally go back to the land of Canaan, and God actually instructed him to do that. And so he leaves Laban's house, and there's a little bit of contention in him leaving in that whole process. But then Laban and him make a peace treaty, and they agree that they're going to go their separate ways in peace. And so with Laban behind him in Haran, he's now coming south to Canaan, and he's going to meet his brother Esau, who, remember, the last time that they were together, Esau wanted to kill Jacob because Jacob had stolen his blessing from him. So there's some question about, what's going to happen? What's Esau's temperament going to be towards Jacob when he finally arrives? That's what we talked about a little bit in the last chapter. Jacob sent some messengers to Esau, and the messengers came back and said, Esau's going to meet you, and he's going to meet you with 400 men. But there wasn't a whole lot of other details, so Jacob didn't know if Esau was coming out with like this small army to basically decimate his household and his caravan and wipe him off the face of the earth as he was intending to do 20 years ago. So Jacob splits his house into a number of different camps so that if one is attacked, maybe the other one will have a chance of escaping. And then he sends them over the river, and he spends the night by himself. And we're told in that very curious story about a man coming and wrestling all night with Jacob. And Jacob, as the sun was rising, asking this man for a blessing. And God blesses Jacob in part by changing his name from Jacob to Israel. And we talked about how that name Israel is so significant because it's going to be by that name that the great nation of people that's going to grow from Jacob's family is going to be called the nation of Israel, or the children of Israel, or the Israelites. And that's a name that we're going to encounter many, many times in the rest of our studies. So that took us to the end of chapter 32. Now we open up chapter 33, and the brothers are finally going to meet, and we're going to see what happens when they do meet. Hopefully, if you're paying attention in the text, you'll know how that went, and you'll be encouraged by how well it went. But before we get into that, let's go to our PDF, which you can download on our website at tobelikechrist.com, totally for free, or you can buy a book on amazon.com that has all 50 chapters of Genesis already in it. The PDF concisely summarizes the key details of the chapter, and the first 3 sections we always cover first, which are when the events happen, who the main characters of the chapter are, and where they happened. And there is a very handy map, which is different today for chapter 33 than it was before, and it will be very helpful in helping you understand geographically where these events took place. So I always encourage you to get the PDF one way or another. There's links down in the description. Okay, so first off, Bible timeline, historical timeline. When did these events happen? The exact date of Jacob's return to Canaan is not known, but using some information throughout the book of Genesis, it seems likely that it occurred between 1745 to 1725 BC. So that places us in time. Let's talk about the key characters here. We have Jacob and Esau, basically. Jacob is the son of Isaac and Rebekah. He's the twin brother of Esau. He's the younger brother. He lived in Haran for 20 years with his uncle Laban after deceiving his father and stealing his brother's birthright. And that's why there's tension between these two brothers, and Jacob doesn't know how he's going to be received. Okay, then we have Esau. This is Jacob's brother who was older than him, twin brother, and he hadn't seen him in 20 years, and Esau was planning to kill him last they met. Esau, we find out in this chapter, has become quite a man of wealth and of significance in and of himself. He's able to muster 400 men to go meet his brother. He must be a leader of a significant group. And now we go to our map, and we are zooming in once again on the Canaan land, or the promised land. So it's really Canaan and kind of the surrounding regions. And remember, it's called the promised land because God has promised to Abraham, and then to Isaac, and then to Jacob, that their descendants are going to get this land as a homeland. So that's why it's the promised land. Jacob was coming from Haran, where he had lived with Laban. That's about 500 miles to the north. That's not on the map because we're zoomed in here. We're leaving Haran behind for a while, or I'm not sure. I don't think we're going back to Haran in the Bible, at least not anytime soon. Esau lived in Seir, which we haven't talked about before. This was a country it was in the country of Edom, and this is south of the Dead Sea. So we talked about how Isaac lived in the Negev. Esau seems to move to the east and maybe a little bit to the south to this land, Edom or Seir. After returning with Esau, Jacob goes and he lives in Succoth and later to Shechem. Succoth is on the east side of the Jordan River, maybe about 5 to 10 miles off the Jordan River. And then Shechem is on the other side of the river. It's on the west side of the river, maybe about 15 to 20 miles to the west of the Jordan. And it's significant that Jacob goes back to Shechem at the end of the chapter because Shechem is in Canaan. He is now back in the place where he needs to be to receive the promises of God. Okay, so those are our first 3 sections laying the foundation for the chapter. Now let's go to our outline and break the chapter down and understand what we just read. With only 20 verses in the chapter, we've got 2 sections today. The first one is entitled, Jacob Reunites with Esau After 20 Years, and this is verses 1 through 11. So the chapter is pretty close to splitting right down the middle in terms of our sections for our outline. Verses 1 through 11. After being blessed by God in Genesis 32 and having his name changed to Israel, Jacob now has to face his brother, who he knows is coming out to meet him with 400 men. And he doesn't know why he's coming out with 400 men. He might be wanting to do him some harm. So fearing that Esau still might hate him after these 20 years, Jacob divides his family into groups, and he puts Rachel and Joseph at the back of these groups. The order this is a bit of speculation. The Bible doesn't tell us this specifically, but the order of the groups and the wives and the sons may be telling a little bit. We already know that Rachel and Joseph, or we know that Rachel is his favorite wife. Later we find out that Joseph is his favorite son, and they're at the back. Why is that? Well, it could be that if Esau's going to attack, the front of the group is going to get attacked first, and the back of the group might have a little bit more time to escape. So Jacob puts his favorite wife and his favorite son at the back to protect them a little bit more. Again, the Bible doesn't tell us that, but it seems from the order that maybe he had that in mind. To Jacob's credit, he does go out in front of all of the groups. He went ahead of his wives and the servants and his children, and he bows to Esau 7 times as they are approaching one another. And then there's this great moment in the story. Esau runs towards his brother, not with a sword, not with malice or hatred in his heart, or intending to attack him. He runs towards his brother and he embraces him, and the text says that he kisses him, and the brothers cried together on account of their happy reunion. So what we find out is that after 20 years, Esau's anger had subsided, and he was just happy to see his brother and all of his brother's family and to be reunited once again. So this story really does have a great, well, this isn't the ending, but this is a great reunion between them. Jacob then introduces his family and his household to Esau, and they all approach and bow to Esau. And again, we see Jacob using this humble language that he is Esau's servant and Esau is his Lord. And we mentioned in the last study that technically in the eyes of God and in God's plan, Esau is not the Lord of Jacob. In fact, in the blessing that was received by Jacob, he was blessed by his father Isaac, and he was told that all of his brothers, including Esau, would be his servant. But Jacob, a man who has been humbled over the years, who wants to make a good impression with his brother, maybe this is a bit of an apologetic tone because Jacob knows that he did some things in the past that maybe he shouldn't have done. He addresses Esau as Lord, and so we see him coming very humbly and with a lot of respect for his brother. We talked about in the last chapter, and on the PDF for chapter 32, we have a list of all of the animals that Jacob sent as gifts for Esau. And Esau here tries to return the gifts to Jacob. And Esau says, I have enough. God has blessed me. I have plenty. He's already a wealthy man. But Jacob insists that he keep them because he wants to make a good impression. He wants to find favor in Esau's eyes, as he puts it. And so after insisting, Esau does keep the gifts. This brings us to the second section of the chapter, the journey to Seir. This is verses 12 through 20. After reuniting, Esau invites Jacob to his home in Seir. And Jacob told him to go ahead. He needed to travel more slowly because of the animals and the children that were in his company. And the next thing that we're told is that Jacob goes to this place called Succoth. And there's some discussion about this. Let me read you verse 16 and 17 from the text. It says, So Esau returned that day on his way to Seir, but Jacob journeyed to Succoth and built himself a house and made booths for his livestock. There's some discussion about, did Jacob actually go to Seir? Because in the text, it doesn't say that he does. And that conjunction, but, says Esau went to Seir, but Jacob returned to journeyed to Succoth. Some people say that this is kind of Jacob's old character coming up here. He tells his brother that he's going to come down to Seir with him and be welcomed into his home, but actually he goes somewhere else. He decides he's not going down to Seir, and he just goes north to Succoth. And admittedly, there certainly from the text you can conclude that. I'm not so sure that's the only conclusion that we can draw, though. I find it really strange. That would be really strange for Jacob to make all these provisions to meet Esau, to make all this effort to make a good impression. And then when he's invited to Esau's home, he just kind of flakes on him. He just kind of stands him up and he says, go ahead and I'll meet you. And then he's like, I'm going to go somewhere else. That would be really weird. I think it's also possible to conclude from the text that Jacob does make the journey to Seir, and the but that we encounter in verse 17, but Jacob journeyed to Succoth, that journey comes after he visits Seir, and the text is saying he doesn't make his homeland in Seir with Esau, but he travels up north to Succoth, and he's going to make his home in a different place. And so it would be my guess that he does indeed go down to Seir and visit his brother. Some people would argue with me about that, and they do suggest he stood up his brother. But I don't know. I find that somewhat hard to believe after the effort that he makes to make a good impression on their initial meeting. And you would think that if Jacob did in fact stand his brother up, that it would destroy all the happiness that they had at their reunion, and it would immediately sour their relationship again. And so, yeah, my guess is he went to Seir. We do find out in verse 17 that eventually he goes to Succoth, which again is on the east side of the Jordan River, and he builds a house and shelter for his livestock there. But later he crosses the Jordan River and he goes to Shechem on the west side in the land of Canaan, and he purchases a piece of land from the sons of Hamor on which to erect his tent. He buys a piece of property that he now owns, and he builds his house there and makes his camp there. And he built an altar at his camp, and he called this altar El Elohi Israel. And in the next chapter, chapter 34, we're going to talk about some interactions. I guess that's a nice way to put it. Some interactions between Jacob and his sons and Hamor and his sons. So the interactions with the local people there in the land of Canaan. That is a very interesting story, and so stay tuned for chapter 34 for that. But as for today, that's our quick summary of chapter 33. Before I leave you today, let's talk about our application. Forgiveness will bring peace to your soul and resolution to your problems. Esau could have held a grudge against his brother for 20 years and refused to forgive him. But that would have been toxic to his soul, and it would have brought war to his house upon Jacob's return. We harm no one more than ourselves when we withhold forgiveness from those who genuinely ask. We forgive people in light of the forgiveness that we receive from God through Jesus. These people may have genuinely done us wrong or treated us terribly, right? But if they come to us and they ask for that forgiveness, we give it to them. Why? Well, it's because sometimes we treat God really poorly, right? And he still forgives us. And so we return that forgiveness to those who wrong us. The more that we appreciate God's forgiveness of us, the quicker we'll extend forgiveness to others. And when we learn to do that, it'll bring peace to our soul and resolution to our problems in a beautiful way as we mimic Jesus's forgiving spirit. So that'll do it for our study in Genesis chapter 33. We have a happy ending to the 20-year-long tension between Jacob and Esau, and that's good to see. We are going to be following Jacob's story in the upcoming chapters. We read that he has 11 sons, and when you have 11 sons, your family can grow pretty quickly, and that's what we're going to see. Their family is finally going to start growing and growing and growing and become this great nation that God promised that they would be. So stay tuned for that, and we'll see how that happens. Lord willing, we will be back tomorrow to talk about Genesis 34.